Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, January 28, 2025. A federal judge puts on hold President Donald Trump's executive order that freezes federal grants and loans until they can be reviewed to make sure they comply with his policy directives. The White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt holding her first news conference of President Donald Trump's second administration, getting questions about this, and also efforts to deport undocumented immigrants. She also promised to always tell the truth, and she announced the mysterious drones flying over New Jersey last year were authorized by the FAA for research. House Republicans continue their issues conference in Florida, working through details on taxes, spending, energy, immigration, and other parts of their agenda. We'll talk with Scott Wong, NBC News senior congressional correspondent from Trump National Doral Miami Resort. Senate confirmed Sean Duffy to be Transportation Secretary. Senate Democrats block a bill that would sanction the International Criminal Court for having issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and former Defense Minister. Israel bars the main United Nations Palestinian Relief Agency from working in Israel, claiming it's been infiltrated by Hamas. A U.S. Senate hearing on the Panama Canal and whether Panama has, as President Trump has said, not lived up to its treaty obligations and should be returned to U.S. control. And the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moves the hands on its symbolic Doomsday Clock, measuring humanity's chances of being wiped out, to 89 seconds to midnight, closest it's ever been. New York Times reports a federal judge in the District of Columbia on Tuesday temporarily blocked the Trump administration's effort to freeze as much as $3 trillion in federal grants and loans, siding for now with activists who said the order was illegal. Judge Ali Khan's decision came in response to a lawsuit filed by the activist group Democracy Forward. The group has argued that the order by the White House Office of Management and Budget violated the First Amendment and the Administrative Procedures Act, a law that governs the executive branch's rulemaking authorities. The suit was separate from a pending action by attorneys general from 22 states and the District of Columbia. That was from the New York Times. Earlier in the day, this did come up at the White House briefing with Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, her first of the brand new administration.
Yesterday, the White House Office of Management and Budget directed across the board freeze, with some exceptions for individual assistance, we understand, to federal grants. It's caused a lot of confusion around the country among Head Start providers, among providers services to homeless veterans, Medicaid providers, states saying they're having trouble accessing the portal. Could you help us clear up some of the confusion, give some certainty to folks, and also is that uncertainty, how does that uncertainty service the president's voters?
Well, I think there's only uncertainty in this room amongst the media. There's no uncertainty in this building. So let me provide the certainty and the clarity that all of you need. This is not a blanket pause on federal assistance and grant programs from the Trump administration. Individual assistance, that includes, I'm not naming everything that's included, but just to give you a few examples, Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits, food stamps, welfare benefits, assistance that is going directly to individuals will not be impacted by this pause. And I want to make that very clear to any Americans who are watching at home who may be a little bit confused about some of the media reporting. This administration, if you are receiving individual assistance from the federal government, you will still continue to receive that. However, it is the responsibility of this president and this administration to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. That is something that President Trump campaigned on. That's why he has launched DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, who is working alongside OMB. And that's why OMB sent out this memo last night, because the president signed an executive order directing OMB to do just this. And the reason for this is to ensure that every penny that is going out the door is not conflicting with the executive orders and actions that this president has taken. So what does this pause mean? It means no more funding for illegal DEI programs. It means no more funding for the Green New scam that has cost American taxpayers tens of billions of dollars. It means no more funding for transgenderism and wokeness across our federal bureaucracy and agencies. No more funding for Green New Deal social engineering policies. Again, people who are receiving individual assistance, you will continue to receive that. And President Trump is looking out for you by issuing this pause because he is being good steward of your taxpayer dollars.
Thanks, Karoline.
Sure.
How long is this pause going to last, and how is the Trump administration recommending that organizations that rely on federal funding make payroll, pay their rent in the meantime?
It is a temporary pause, and the Office of Management and Budget is reviewing the federal funding that has been going out the door. Again, not for individual assistance, but for all of these other programs that I mentioned. I also spoke with the incoming director of OMB this morning, and he told me to tell all of you that the line to his office is open for other federal government agencies across the board, and if they feel that programs are necessary and in line with the president's agenda, then the Office of Management and Budget will review those policies. I think this is a very responsible measure. Again, the past 4 years, we've seen the Biden administration spend money like drunken sailors. It's a big reason we've had an inflation crisis in this country, and it's incumbent upon this administration to make sure, again, that every penny is being accounted for honestly.
The White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt taking reporters' questions in the White House briefing room. After that briefing, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. put a temporary halt on the White House pause on the grants and loans until February 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern. ABC News writes, when asked if Medicaid was impacted by the pause, Leavitt couldn't immediately say from the podium, and she would check back. She also did not directly respond to a question on the impact on organizations like Meals on Wheels, which provides meals to 2.2 million seniors, or Head Start, a program for preschool education that receive federal funding. Democratic Senator Ron Wyden posted on social media about reports about Medicaid portals being down in states as he criticized the freeze. Leavitt, after the briefing, wrote on X, "The White House is aware of the Medicaid website portal outage. We have confirmed no payments have been affected. They are still being processed and sent. We expect the portal will be back online shortly." Reporting from ABC News. While this was all taking place before the judge put the temporary halt on the freeze, there was reaction on Capitol Hill. Here's Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, ranking member on the Appropriations Committee.
In a brazen and illegal move, the Trump administration is working to freeze huge amounts of federal funding passed into law by Republicans and Democrats alike. The scope of this illegal action is unprecedented and could have devastating consequences across the country for real people. We could see a screeching halt to resources for childcare, cancer research, housing, police officers, opioid addiction treatment, rebuilding roads and bridges, and even disaster relief efforts. He was just in California to witness the devastation, and now he is holding back that aid. Trump's actions would wreak havoc in red and blue communities everywhere. This is funding that communities are expecting, and this memo is creating chaos and confusion about whether these resources will be available to them. Entire budgets and payrolls across the country are carefully hinging on these resources. We are talking about our small towns, our cities, our school districts, our universities, and a lot more. Will local Head Start facilities get their funding? Will grantees at our local universities get the funding that they use to continue clinical trials? What does this mean for our homeless veterans we are working to get housed? Americans should ask themselves, is it woke to fund cancer research or to rebuild an unsafe bridge? All of these critical priorities are funded by the grants the Trump administration would pause tonight. This illegal move is a massive, massive overreach by the Trump administration. The American people did not vote for this kind of senseless chaos.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, ranking member on the Appropriations Committee at a news conference today. And initially, that executive order from President Donald Trump was to go into effect at 5 p.m. Eastern tonight. And a federal judge has now put that off until February 3rd at 5 p.m. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, was asked about the grant and loan freeze at a separate news conference.
On this memo from the OMB here, I mean, do you expect Republicans, and I'd be curious to hear from some of your colleagues here, do you expect Republicans to say, okay, this is the executive branch, or draw a line in the sand and say this is the legislative branch, we have the power to reverse, we're going to push back on that, we're going to protect our prerogatives? Do you think this is a dangerous situation to have the administration try to claim so much power so quickly without clarity over administration, over
Well, I think they are clarifying it, and I think this is not unusual for an administration to pause funding and to take a hard look and scrub of how these programs, how they're being spent, and how they interact with a lot of the executive orders that the president signed. And I think that's the main criteria they're using is, does this implicate, do the executive orders implicate funding in this particular way? They have taken certain things, I think, off the table. Some of you have asked specifically about programs, any program that directly benefits an individual, Medicaid, SNAP, those types of programs are unimpacted by this. What is impacted, obviously, is DEI, the Green New Deal, things like that. And so those are in direct contradiction with the EOs the president signed earlier this week. So they're providing,
the Green New Deal involved major infrastructure projects.
And they're providing additional clarity and guidance on that. And hopefully they will further clarify what exactly will be impacted by this. But I don't think it's unusual for an administration to pause. They certainly did that. Biden did that in 2021 with respect to funding for the border wall.
The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, taking reporters' questions at a news conference today. And since that news conference, a federal judge has put a temporary block on President Donald Trump's freeze of the federal aid programs. Political Rights ruling that the courts need more time to consider the potentially far-reaching ramifications of his order. Returning to the White House briefing with Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, her first of the new administration, ran about 45 minutes, covered many topics. We covered it live. We got the video at cspan.org. One of the first questions from a reporter was how she sees her role in relation to the reporters in the room.
Zeke Miller.
Thanks, Caroline. A question that we've asked your predecessors of both parties in this job. When you're up here in this briefing room speaking to the American public, do you view yourself and your role as advocating on behalf of the president or providing the unvarnished truth that is, not to lie, not to obfuscate to the American people?
I commit to telling the truth from this podium every single day. I commit to speaking on behalf of the President of the United States. That is my job. And I will say it's very easy to speak truth from this podium when you have a president who is implementing policies that are wildly popular with the American people, and that's exactly what this administration is doing. It's correcting the lies and the wrongs of the past 4 years, many of the lies that have been told to your faces in this very briefing room. I will not do that. But since you brought up truth, Zeke, I would like to point out, while I vowed to provide the truth from this podium, we ask that all of you in this room hold yourselves to that same standard. We know for a fact there have been lies that have been pushed by many legacy media outlets in this country about this president, about his family, and we will not accept that. We will call you out when we feel that your reporting is wrong or there is misinformation about this White House. So yes, I will hold myself to the truth, and I expect everyone in this room to do the same.
The White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. She also announced at today's news conference changes on who can cover the White House, opening up to new media. She said independent journalists, podcasters, and social media influencers are welcome to apply for press passes. And she said the White House would reinstate the press privileges of dozens of outlets with over 400 journalists that were, in her words, wrongly revoked by the previous administration. And seats in the White House briefing room previously occupied by White House staff would be filled, she said, by members of new media and get to ask the first questions. And today, the first questions went to Axios and Breitbart. Washington Post, covering the news conference, writes that Press Secretary Leavitt quickly turned the focus of her opening statements during her news briefing to President Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration, a reflection of the president's focus on the issue. She highlighted some of his early executive orders on the issue. She said President Trump has sent a loud and clear message to the entire world. America will no longer tolerate illegal immigration, and this president expects that every nation on this planet will cooperate with the repatriation of their citizens. So to foreign nationals who are thinking about trying to illegally enter the United States, think again. Under this president, you'll be detained and you will be deported every day, Leavitt added. That was from the Washington Post. And this came up as well during questions from reporters.
President Trump, during the course of the campaign in 2024, said the following about illegal immigration. He said, they're going back home where they belong, and we start with the criminals. There are many, many criminals. NBC News has learned that ICE arrested 1,179 undocumented immigrants on Sunday, but nearly half of them, 566 of the migrants, appear to have no prior criminal record besides entering the country illegally. Is the president still focused exclusively, which is a civil crime, it's not criminal,
It's a federal crime.
So I'm asking, though, he said he was going to focus on those violent offenders first. So is violent offenders no longer the predicate for these people to be deported?
The president has said countless times on the campaign trail, I've been with him at the rallies, I know you've been there covering them too, Peter, that he is focused on launching the largest mass deportation operation in American history of illegal criminals. And if you are an individual, a foreign national, who illegally enters the United States of America, you are, by definition, a criminal. And so therefore, you are subject to deportation.
I apologize for interrupting. So to be clear, it's not violent criminals do not receive precedence in terms of the deportations taking place.
The president has also said two things can be true at the same time. We want to deport illegal criminals, illegal immigrants from this country, but the president has said that, of course, the illegal criminal drug dealers, the rapists, the murderers, the individuals who have committed heinous acts on the interior of our country and who have terrorized law-abiding American citizens, absolutely, those should be the priority of ICE, but that doesn't mean that the other illegal criminals who entered our nation's borders are off the table.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt at today's news conference in the White House briefing room. She also provided an update on those mysterious drones seen across New Jersey and the East Coast last year, saying they were authorized to be flown by the Federal Aviation Administration and, in her words, are not the enemy.
And before I turn to questions, I do have news directly from the President of the United States that was just shared with me in the Oval Office. From President Trump directly, an update on the New Jersey drones. After research and study, the drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons. Many of these drones were also hobbyists, recreational, and private individuals that enjoy flying drones. In time, it got worse due to curiosity. This was not the enemy.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, she also talked about the economy, saying that President Trump's promise to put in place 25% tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada starting this Saturday, February 1st, still on the books. And when asked about inflation and the rising price of eggs, said there's a lot of reporting out there that's putting the onus on this White House for the increased cost of eggs. I'd like to point out to each and every one of you that in 2024, when Joe Biden was in the Oval Office or upstairs in the residence sleeping, I'm not so sure, egg prices increased 65% in this country. Again, the full news conference ran about 45 minutes. First of the brand new administration. Find the full video at cspan.org, our video library. This is Washington Today. Political rights from Doral, Florida. House Republicans are in for a long day of tough conversations about how to pay for President Donald Trump's massive legislative agenda at their Florida retreat, with various factions already drawing red lines over the package. Speaker Mike Johnson told GOP members during a closed-door meeting Tuesday morning at Trump's Miami area resort that the level of spending cuts contained in the party line package encompassing border, energy, and tax policy will be determined by what is achievable in the committee process, according to two people in the room. House GOP hardliners are pushing for massive cuts across the federal government in that sweeping legislation, which is set to be passed using the budget reconciliation process. Republicans in competitive districts, however, have raised concerns about slashing the social safety net and some other federal programs. That was from Politico. Congressman Tom Emmer, Republican of Minnesota, the majority whip, was interviewed on Fox News Channel today from the House Republican retreat.
The work is in progress, Ainsley, so the final work product will be the key. All the committees are doing their work. We'll have a vote on a budget resolution next week, which unlocks the process, and then it'll move forward from there. But our job is to make sure that every one of our members has ownership of this process. It works a lot better when you get to the end of the process if they've all been involved. And then, of course, the president, he's the big X factor. He's not only a unifier for this country, but he's a huge unifying force for our small majority.
Yeah, what are the issues? What do the Republicans disagree on? Is it tax cuts? Is it securing the border?
There's a internal discussion about how you account for the tax cuts. There's a group that looks at the government's accounting system as a scam, right? They count your income, Ainsley, in their budget before you ever earn it. And when we tell Ainsley she can keep some of her money, they suddenly say, oh, that costs us all kinds of money, when it's really about balancing the budget, taking care of your deficit, and dealing with the debt. There's another group that says we have to pay for it. I heard Brian talking about it earlier. It's about a $4 to $5 trillion, about $4.5 trillion, we'll say, pay for that you have to get to do all of the tax cuts. Now, you also have the chairs of these committees in the Senate and the House, Jason Smith in the House, who believe that a continuation of existing policy shouldn't cost anything because we're not changing anything. So that's the debate. It'll play itself out towards the end. And when we get there, Ainsley, we are going to get this thing done. That is why the American people elected Donald Trump. And that's why we have to perform to enact his agenda.
Congressman Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, Majority Whip on Fox News Channel. Joining us now from the House Republican retreat at Trump National Doral Miami in Florida is Scott Wong, NBC News senior congressional correspondent. Thanks for being with us. House Republicans have been trying to hash out how to put together a budget reconciliation bill, or maybe two bills, to encompass President Trump's agenda. Any decisions announced?
No decisions announced. The Republicans have been sort of putting off getting into the nitty-gritty as much as they can. At some point, the rubber's going to hit the road. But this gathering here at the Trump property in Doral, Florida, really was meant to be, a celebration of sorts of Trump coming back into office, of him having a very aggressive start with many of his executive orders that we've seen over the past week. We heard from Trump himself, of course, here last night. His remarks were televised, and he received a very good response from House Republicans, who he counts among his many allies. Today we heard from J.D. Vance, who was here at Doral, who told Republicans, let's try to work together. Let's try to get on the same page. We know that it's going to be challenging tackling this reconciliation package and tackling Trump's 2025 legislative agenda. But let's do our best to get on the same page. Now, this afternoon, after those appearances by the president and vice president, now Republicans are holding smaller group meetings. They're holding these sort of sessions to try to get into the details of not only what's going to be in these reconciliation packages, which they will try to push through with only Republican votes in the House and the Senate, but also how do you go about paying for it without increasing the deficit in a significant amount? And these are really the questions of where we could see quite a few disagreements in the weeks and months ahead.
What has attendance been like? With such small margins, even a couple of members not being there can make a difference.
Attendance here actually has been quite good, I think in large part because of the magnitude of the moment that they're in. Remember, Republicans control the entire federal government now, House, Senate, White House, the trifecta. The last time they were in this situation where voters sent them both majorities in the Congress and the White House was 2017, Trump's first presidency. And they struggled mightily to try to repeal Obamacare. If you remember, in 2017, they ultimately failed with that famous John McCain thumbs down vote that ruined their efforts that they had spent months and months working on. They did manage that year to get the Trump tax cuts into law. The Trump tax cuts are important because many of those are now expiring. And if Republicans cannot renew those Trump tax cuts this year, taxes will go up for millions and millions of Americans, something Republicans certainly do not want to see, and something they certainly did not promise voters, that taxes would go up on them. And so this is a pivotal moment. The large majority, overwhelming majority of the House Republican Conference, about 220 members, are here in attendance. There's a handful of absences, but that's usually to be expected. The main players are here, the leadership, Speaker Johnson and his team, the committee chairmen who are leading many of these smaller sessions. They are here putting in the work. Leaders of the various caucuses, Freedom Caucus, Angie Harris, people like that, they're all here in attendance. They're also hearing from people like Kellyanne Conway, the former counselor to President Trump, and other pollsters and people like that who can sort of explain maybe what they saw in this last election, what they anticipate heading into the 2026 cycle, and also laying out some of the challenges in the months ahead that we had talked about concerning this reconciliation package.
We're talking with Scott Wong from NBC News. What is it like covering this type of event as a journalist? I've seen some videos posted from other journalists where they're catching up with members going from point A to point B. Have you been able to do that?
You know, I have to say I've been to quite a few of these. We call them GOP retreats. They are policy or issues conferences, usually held off-site, away from the Capitol. They are more relaxed. Members often will bring their spouses to these events. There are congressional dinners with family members. It is obviously, I'm standing outside right now in 80-degree balmy weather, something I much prefer than the weather we've had in D.C. in recent weeks. There's palm trees. There are members, before things really got started, there were lawmakers and staffers hanging out poolside. And so it really is intended to be a more relaxed environment. However, people do get into the specifics of the policy issues, and when they are in the middle of this retreat, that is something that they are entirely focused on. So while it is a beautiful environment and a more relaxed environment, they are talking about the issues of the country, and also being asked by reporters whenever we can catch up with them some of the questions of the day, specifically in this particular week, those that, President Trump, those questions are focused on the actions of President Trump and many of his executive orders.
Scott Wong, NBC News senior congressional correspondent, joining us from Trump National Doral Miami in Florida at the House Republican retreat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
CNBC writes that stocks climbed Tuesday, recovering some ground from a sell-off sparked by the emergence of Chinese artificial intelligence startup DeepSeek that sent tech shares reeling. The Dow up 136, Nasdaq up 391, S&P up 55. From Associated Press, Sean Duffy has been confirmed as Transportation Secretary, giving him a key role in President Donald Trump's administration. Duffy, a 53-year-old former Wisconsin congressman and reality TV star, was approved on a 77-22 vote in the Senate. Duffy has promised safer Boeing planes, less regulation, and help for U.S. companies developing self-driving cars, while not giving any breaks to Elon Musk, a key player in that technology. Senator John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, the majority whip, spoke on the Senate floor before the vote.
Since January 20th, the United States Senate has confirmed 6 of President Trump's well-qualified nominees. Today, we will confirm the 6th. Former Congressman Sean Duffy is the nominee to be the Secretary of Transportation. Congressman Duffy received unanimous support in the Commerce Committee. As Secretary of Transportation, Congressman Duffy will be responsible for ensuring Americans have reliable infrastructure and safe travel. His job is critical to America's economic success. From the Erie Canal to the Transcontinental Railroad in the 19th century, from the Panama Canal to the interstate highway system in the 20th century, infrastructure transformed our commercial republic into an economic superpower. Today, our highways, our bridges, our ports, and our airways need improvement as travel and commerce hit record highs. We need to build great things in America again. Families and businesses need confidence that they'll get where they need to go. Sean Duffy is dedicated to moving our nation forward. As Secretary of Transportation, he will lead the department with safety and modernization at the forefront. I look forward, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, to confirming Congressman Duffy today and working with him during this next administration.
Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, the majority whip on the Senate floor before the Senate voted 77-22 to confirm Sean Duffy. A Senate procedural vote on the Duffy nomination from Monday was unanimous, 99-0. But now 22 Democrats voting no. One of them, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, posting on X, "I was ready to confirm Sean Duffy to lead the Department of Transportation, but I cannot vote for him after the chaos President Trump has unleashed with his order to pause critical federal funding to Nevada." The funding being held up by President Trump includes support for Nevada's seniors, veterans, and families, not to mention grants for job-creating transportation projects statewide. Working families deserve real answers from the Trump administration about how they are going to fix the mess they've created. That was from Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. And from the New York Post, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem joined federal authorities Tuesday for the first deportation raids in New York City under President Trump's clampdown, lauding ICE for getting, quote, dirtbags off the streets. Later in the day, Secretary Noem spoke to employees at the Homeland Security Department in Washington. And Washington Today continues in a moment.
Coming up tomorrow on C-SPAN Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern, HHS Secretary nominee Robert F. Kennedy Jr. testifies at his confirmation hearing. Then at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell holds a news conference. That's all here on C-SPAN Radio. Listen on the free C-SPAN Now app or online anytime at cspan.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. From the Hill, the leaders of the Senate Judiciary Committee sent a rare bipartisan letter to President Trump demanding an explanation for his firing of 17 inspectors general in one night. The rebuke said Trump violated the law by failing to give Congress 30 days' notice and a rationale for the removal for each of the watchdogs at the 18 agencies where they provided oversight. The letter was sent by Senators Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, and Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois. And also from the Hill, Senator Gary Peters, Democrat of Michigan, announced Tuesday he will not seek re-election next year, dealing a blow to Democrats in the key battleground state. And HuffPost reports that Senate Republicans on Tuesday blocked a symbolic resolution condemning President Donald Trump's pardons for rioters who attacked police on January 6, 2021. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, asked the Senate for unanimous consent to adopt the resolution, connecting the mass pardon for rioters to Trump's controversial pause on all federal grants this week. On behalf of Republicans, Senator John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, objected, saying he was grateful to be a week into the Trump administration and that the Democrats weren't interested in having a serious conversation about misuse of the presidential pardon power. He said if they want a serious conversation, they would talk about Joe Biden's pardons. Senate Democrats writes Politico successfully blocked the GOP-led bill to sanction the International Criminal Court on Tuesday afternoon. As they've tried to negotiate changes to the legislation with Republicans. Republicans are pushing the bill in response to the ICC charging Israeli officials over the war in Gaza. Democrats worry that the bill was too broad and could lead to sanctions against U.S. allies that are ICC member states, and U.S. tech companies that provide support to the court have been trying to negotiate language to address those concerns. That was from Politico. Here's the debate on the Senate floor before the procedural vote. Senator Jim Risch, Republican of Idaho, chairs the Foreign Relations Committee.
When the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister for defending their country against an unprovoked, brutal attack on their homeland, the ICC was exceeding its mandate. There's no question about that in my mind, and further, there is no question in my mind that it is a clear demonstration of the court's inability to focus on justice and determine what is justice and determine what is right and what is wrong. The ICC does not have jurisdiction over Israel. This clearly political move erased the last illusions of legitimacy for the organization and is just another example of partisanship and anti-Semitism infecting our international organizations like the United Nations, the ICJ, and of course, the ICC. This needs to end. The United States needs to stand in solidarity with our ally Israel, not only by providing them with the assistance they need for their self-defense, but by sanctioning the ICC to compel the organization to change its corrupt behavior and countering this blatant anti-Semitism wherever it appears.
Senator Jim Risch, Republican from Idaho, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee on the Senate floor. The ranking Democrat on the committee is Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, and she spoke against the bill.
I understand my colleagues' concerns about whether the court has jurisdiction over Israel, and I share those. I agree the court should not focus its resources investigating U.S. service members. I can't believe anybody in this chamber wants to see that. But the way this bill is drafted, sanctioning the ICC will not get them to withdraw the arrest warrants for Israeli officials. It could actually have the opposite effect, hardening the court's position. These sweeping sanctions we are about to consider are an incredibly powerful tool, and making this an issue that frankly goes beyond Israel and the United States and stretching around the world is not going to be helpful to our national security. These sanctions will make it almost impossible for the United States to engage the court on other issues in our national interest, whether that's prosecuting the atrocities in Sudan, or human rights abuses by the Taliban, or in Venezuela, or Russia's war crimes against Ukraine.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire, ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee on the Senate floor before the Senate voted not to advance this bill to sanction the International Criminal Court. The vote was 54 to 45, a majority, but less than the 60 votes needed. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was the only Democrat to vote yes. This bill has already passed the House. Story from I-24 News. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, on Tuesday notified the UN that UNRWA must cease its activities inside sovereign Israeli territory within 48 hours. This is in accordance with Israel's law, which barred the agency last year after numerous members of the organization were proven by Israel to have participated and aided in the massacre on October 7, 2023. That's as the news site I-24 News reported it. UNRWA is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, the main relief agency for Palestinians. Ambassador Danon spoke at the United Nations in New York City before a Security Council meeting.
I hereby inform the United Nations and the Security Council that the legislation concerning UNRWA's activities in Israel will officially come into force in 48 hours on January 30. In accordance with applicable Israeli law and following the termination of the provisional agreement, UNRWA must cease its operations and evacuate all premises it operates in Jerusalem, including the properties located in Ma'alot Dafna and Kfar Akeb. The legislation forbids UNRWA from operating within the sovereign territory of the State of Israel and forbids any contact between Israeli officials and UNRWA. Furthermore, UNRWA will be prohibited from maintaining any representative, office, service, or activity within our territory. Israel will terminate all collaboration, communication, and contact with UNRWA or anyone acting on its behalf. This decision was not made lightly, nor was it made quickly. It was not a political decision. It was simply a necessary one. It follows decades of betrayal by an agency that has placed political agendas, neglect, and cover-ups over humanitarian principles. This decision reflects years of efforts to address the grave accusations raised against UNRWA. This decision also reflects the reality of the situation that UNRWA has miserably failed in its mandate, and it has failed the people who were supposed to benefit from its services. More precisely, this decision was driven by UNRWA's constant refusal to address the widespread infiltration of its ranks by Hamas and other terrorist organizations.
Danny Danon is Israel's ambassador to the UN, speaking to reporters at the United Nations in New York City outside the Security Council chambers. Returning to the I-24 News article, UNRWA's head, Philip Lazzarini, has stated that Israel's evidence was unsubstantiated. Lazzarini said that Israel's move will heighten instability and deepen despair in the occupied Palestinian territory at a critical moment. The Algerian ambassador to the United Nations, Amar Benjama, spoke at today's Security Council meeting, which was on this issue.
For over 75 years, UNRWA has been the lifeline for the Palestinian people. From birth to education, healthcare to food assistance, UNRWA has been an integral part of their lives. For generations of Palestinians, UNRWA is not just an agency. It is life itself. This role was especially crucial during the 15 months of the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people in Gaza. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response, and its role remains essential under the ceasefire as efforts continue to address the urgent needs of the Palestinian people. For Palestinians, for the humanitarian community, and for the international community, UNRWA is irreplaceable.
The Algerian ambassador to the United Nations, Amar Benjama, at today's Security Council meeting on Israel's law barring UNRWA from operating in Israel. Associated Press writes, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says President Trump has invited him to the White House on February 4th. This will make Netanyahu the first foreign leader to visit Washington in Trump's second term. AP writes the visit comes as the United States is pressuring Israel and Hamas to continue a ceasefire that has paused a devastating 15-month war in Gaza. This is Washington Today. The U.S. Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee held a hearing today titled, by the Republican majority on the committee, Fees and Foreign Influence, Examining the Panama Canal and Its Impact on U.S. Trade and National Security. President Donald Trump has said the transit fees charged by Panama are too high. He said in his inauguration speech last week that China is operating the Panama Canal and, quote, we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back. Donald Trump arguing that Panama has broken a pledge of neutrality made with the United States when it transferred the canal to Panama in 1999. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, the committee chair, elaborated on these points in his opening statement.
President Trump has highlighted two key issues. Number one, the danger of China exploiting or blocking passage through the canal. And number two, the exorbitant costs for transit. Chinese companies are right now building a bridge across the canal at a slow pace so as to take nearly a decade. And Chinese companies control container ports at either end. The partially completed bridge gives China the ability to block the canal without warning. And the ports give China ready observation posts to time that action. This situation, I believe, poses acute risks to U.S. national security. Meanwhile, the high fees for canal transit disproportionately affect Americans because U.S. cargo accounts for nearly 3/4 of canal transits. U.S. Navy vessels pay additional fees that apply only to warships. Canal profits regularly exceed $3 billion. This money comes from both American taxpayers and consumers in the form of higher costs for goods.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, chaired the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee at the start of today's hearing. Associated Press, writing about the Panama Canal, says that the president of that country, Jose Raul Mulino, rejects President Trump's assertion of foreign influence over the canal, saying there is no presence of any nation in the world that interferes with our administration. A witness at today's Senate hearing, Eugene Kontorovich, George Mason University law professor, spoke about whether Panama has violated the treaty with the U.S. that gave Panama control of the canal in 1999.
Article 5 provides that only Panama shall operate the canal. Testifying about the meaning of the treaty at the Senate ratification hearings, the Carter administration emphasized that this prohibits foreign operation of the canal as well as the garrisoning of foreign troops. Now, Article 5 appears to be primarily concerned about control by foreign sovereigns. If Panama signed a treaty with the People's Republic of China, whereby the latter would operate the canal on Panama's behalf, this would be a clear violation. But what if Panama contracted for port operations with a Chinese state firm, or even a private firm influenced or controlled in part by the Chinese government? The Suez Canal Company was itself, before being nationalized, a private firm in which the United Kingdom was only a controlling shareholder. Yet this was understood to represent British control over the canal. In other words, a company need not be owned by the government to be in part controlled by the government. So the real question is the degree of de jure or de facto control over a foreign sovereign company, and scenarios range from government companies in an authoritarian regime, completely controlled, to purely private firms in an open society like the United States, but there's many possible situations in the middle. The treaty is silent on the question of how much control is too much, and as we'll see, this is one of the many questions committed to the judgment and discretion of each party. Now, turning to foreign security forces, the presence of third country troops would manifestly violate Article 5, but this does not mean that anything short of a People's Liberation Army base flying a red flag is permissible. The presence of foreign security forces could violate the regime of neutrality, even if they're not represented in organized and open military formations. Modern warfare has seen belligerent powers seek to evade international legal limitations by disguising their actions in civilian garb. From Russia's notorious little green men to Hamas terrorists hiding in hospitals or disguised as journalists, bad actors seek to exploit the fact that international treaties focus on sovereign actors. Many of China's man-made islands in the South China Sea began as civilian projects before being suddenly militarized. Indeed, this issue was discussed in the Senate ratification hearings over the treaty. Dean Rusk said informal forces would be prohibited under the treaty. Thus, the ostensible civilian character of the Chinese presence around the canal does not in itself mean that it could not represent a violation of the treaty if, for example, these companies and their employees involved Chinese covert agents or other agents of the Chinese security forces. So this leads us to the final question: who determines whether neutrality is being threatened or compromised? Unlike many other treaties that provide for third-party dispute resolution, the neutrality treaty has no such provision. Instead, the treaty makes clear that each party determines for itself the existence of a violation.
Eugene Kontorovich, George Mason University law professor, testifying to the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee at today's hearing about the Panama Canal. From Reuters, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will visit Panama during his first overseas trip. In the Post, a source told Reuters, as President Donald Trump makes a push for the U.S. to take back the Panama Canal that has angered the Central American country. Rubio is expected to depart on January 31st and travel during the first week of February, making additional stops in Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, and El Salvador, according to the source familiar with the plans. That was from Reuters. Also, this from Reuters: Denmark said on Monday it would spend 14.6 billion Danish crowns, about $2 billion U.S., boosting its military presence in the Arctic, following renewed interest by U.S. President Donald Trump in controlling Greenland, a semi-autonomous Danish territory. USA Today writes humanity is at its closest yet to destroying itself, according to Tuesday's reset of the ominous Doomsday Clock. The symbolic clock now reads 89 seconds to midnight after advancing 1 second since last year's reset. It is now the closest to midnight since the introduction of the clock in 1947. It's updated by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which organizes the assessment of how close we are to self-inflicted end of humanity. That was from the USA Today article. At today's briefing in Washington, Daniel Holtz, chair of the Bulletin's Science and Security Board.
We set the clock closer to midnight because we do not see sufficient positive progress on the global challenges we face, including nuclear risk, climate change, biological threats, and advances in disruptive technologies. The countries that possess nuclear weapons are increasing the size and role of their arsenals, investing hundreds of billions of dollars in weapons that can destroy civilization many times over. Meanwhile, arms control treaties are in tatters, and there are active conflicts involving nuclear powers. The world's attempts to deal with climate change remain inadequate, as most governments fail to enact the financing and policy initiatives necessary to halt global warming. 2023 was the hottest year on record, by far, and 2024 was even hotter. Advances in an array of disruptive technologies, including biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and in space, have far outpaced policy, regulation, and a thorough understanding of their consequences. All of these dangers are greatly exacerbated by a potent threat multiplier: the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories that degrade the communication ecosystem and increasingly blur the line between truth and falsehood. A statement summarizing these concerns is now available at thebulletin.org. All of us need to help raise the alarm. Our fervent hope is that our political, civic, cultural, and business leaders take bold action to reduce these threats and turn back the hands of the Doomsday Clock.
Daniel Holtz is chair of the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists at today's news conference at the U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington on that decision to move the Doomsday Clock 1 second closer to midnight to 89 seconds, closest in the history of the clock. It was created in 1947. At that time, it was set at 7 minutes to midnight, and the farthest away it's ever been was 1991, 17 minutes. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.